Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this Meta Compliance webinar, where we'll be taking a deep dive into Agile policy management. I hope you're all well. And since you ask, I'm feeling great. And I put that down to my new yoga regime. That's right, because I'm not going to lie. I'm reaching an age where some things that perhaps used to be easier, that I didn't really have to think about, aren't quite as comfortable as once they were. So after taking the dog for a walk, I was finding that my legs were beginning to ache a little bit. My joints were a little bit stiff. I realized that perhaps I've been losing some of my youthful fitness and agility. Now, I get why. It's because life, because work, it's all very busy, and maybe I've let my fitness and my agility take a bit of a back seat. So my wife, ever the sage, suggested that I reclaim some focus on myself and try some yoga. Now, I have to say, I'm genuinely beginning to feel the difference, and even bending down to tie up my shoelaces is certainly a lot easier now. Anyway, enough about me. Back to today's webinar, which completely by coincidence is also, we're going to be talking about agility and flexibility, but this time in a business environment, particularly when it comes to policy management. Speaking of agile and flexible, let's welcome our guests for today. We have Meta Compliance CEO Robbie O'Brien. Hello, Robbie.
Delighted to be here, David.
And governance, risk and compliance guru, Michael Rasmussen. Hello, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So, Robbie, before we kick off, how do you stay fit and flexible?
I'm with you. At the beginning of the quarantine, I started yoga as well. It's great. You can watch it on YouTube. I try not to inadvertently get into some of those more advanced yoga because they are seriously distracting, and you know, they're just there's no way that the human body can get into those types of poses. But yeah, yoga, fantastic.
Good stuff. And Michael, what's been your top tip for staying match fit at work and at home, or indeed if they're the same place?
Oh, well, I work out with my wife regularly, and so we're not quite in the same type of lockdown as the UK is, and so it's much easier to get outside. But I understand that you guys can still get outside. But you know, we bought the Nordic Track studio bike behind me with the screen on there, and I get to go biking around the world. So I just finished a 12-part series biking through Norway.
Wow!
And have to figure out what's next.
That does sound like a lot of fun. Well, I'm pleased that we have three fit, flexible, agile specimens here. Let's see if we can apply that in some way to the workplace. Now, today we're talking about policies, and I want to level set first of all. What do we actually mean by policies? That's a multifaceted word. And what purpose do they serve in the workplace in this context? Robbie, I'll come to you first.
I mean, policies is one of those things that people, their eyes just glaze over when you start talking about them. And I think if you look at policies as the laws of an organization, it's where the do's and don'ts are written down. They actually become quite important. They're quite important when something goes wrong. And unlike laws, no one ever really pays attention to them until something goes wrong. But when they do go wrong, you better make sure that they're fit for purpose, right?
And it's going to be all kinds of organizations. It's not specific verticals. It's not just financial services or healthcare that have these policies. It's across the board, was it? Across
the board. And I think that, you know, as time passes, a lot of people are beginning to realize that bringing policies into a unified, accessible way for your organization is a way of hugely minimizing risk. And I think that individuals themselves understand that if an organization or a government goes to the effort of writing down a policy, that it's something serious. And I mean, there is just so many things that an organization has to take into account to ensure that it provides proper oversight, that it provides proper compliance with the myriad of different laws and regulations that we have to follow these days. So there is a train of thought, much more prevalent than I can actually attest to, which is put the content of a policy into almost a legal contract. A 26-page policy. Well, that I think goes against the concept of what a policy should be. And really it is something that people can really use that will drive behaviors, that will, underpin the controls that you've put into place to mitigate risks and to take your business in the way that you want to go. And policies and playlists and procedures, I mean, they're all related, but the problem is in a lot of organizations, these have grown up over years. They're not well organized. And, when it comes to the overall issues of compliance and information security, they really are the backbone of it.
Michael, what's your starter for 10 on trying to define what policies are, maybe what policies aren't as well?
A couple of the firms that I've worked with have called their policy management program their governance documents program, because that's where it starts. It's governance. And in that context, I cover governance, risk management, and compliance, GRC, in my research. And policies intersect with all three. We might think of policies as compliance documents, and they are, but they're much more than that. They are definitely governance documents. The governance piece is about reliably achieving objectives, directing and steering the organization or layers of the organization, and being able to reliably achieve objectives. And that policies, first and foremost, are governance documents. They help us reliably achieve objectives. Can you imagine an organization without policies? They could never reliably achieve objectives. I mean, a manufacturing process without quality process policies or health and safety policies. If we didn't have HR policies or, accounting policies, expenses would be all over the map. It'd be too hard to manage. Policies provide a framework so that we can reliably achieve business objectives. Policies are also risk documents. The very fact that we have a policy means there's a risk. There wouldn't be a policy if there was not a risk and the risk was significant enough that we actually had to write a policy to actually address this risk and to control and guide behavior around that risk. But policies are also compliance documents. They help us act with integrity to the laws, rules, regulations, but also to the values and ethics and contractual obligations of the organization as well.
Is there a conversation around whether policies are more carrot in terms of leading an organization or stick in terms of beating it from behind and pushing it into a particular direction, Michael?
I would say it's both. Policy enforcement can be a stick. So if you don't follow the policy and you get your hand slapped, that's definitely a stick. I mean, a policy that's not enforced is a guideline, and it's not a policy. And so there is a stick element because policies need to be followed and enforced, but they're also a carrot, particularly in this day and age. Or individuals, particularly the millennial generation, but even beyond, they want to make sure that they're working with an organization that shares the same values and commitments that they do. And a lot of that gets defined in like the code of conduct and other policies like harassment and discrimination policies. And it's important that those policies are lived and breathed in the organization. So there's this carrot element to encourage the right behavior, but also to even build that culture that, this is what the organization's about. These are our defined values and how we approach things. And that actually helps with a stronger sense of belonging and shared values.
And we'll come on to some of those benefits in a way in a moment. So in terms of definitions, they're policies, they're the rule books, they're the frameworks for the workplace and for the organization to achieve its objectives, whatever they may be. Some of it's self-evident, but Michael, I'll come to you. What's at stake if these different types of policies aren't adhered to? Well,
first and foremost, you've got a cultural issue. I mean, if there's policies and they're not adhered to, it's going to corrupt your culture. And the employees in the organization are going to be frustrated because they feel that the organization doesn't care. They establish policies and make things look pretty, but they go in a different direction as far as behavior. So, I mean, there's a cultural impact. There's definitely a regulatory impact for those policies related to laws and regulations. Related to regulations, but different, is a liability. I mean, I live in the US, the most highly litigious country in the world, where we love our lawsuits. If an organization has a policy and it's communicated as a policy, maybe it's not even an official policy of the organization, like some store manager or branch manager wrote a document, called it a policy, and communicated as a policy. Maybe it's not an official policy, but it was communicated by a manager that it was. That could put a legal duty of care and a liability and exposure upon the organization. Can you imagine today if some store manager or branch manager thinks they're a little smarter than the rest of the organization and says, I think I could write a better COVID-19 policy. Maybe that branch manager doesn't believe in the virus because there's some that think it's a hoax. And somebody gets sick, an employee, a customer, or something like that, that puts a legal duty of care upon the organization that manager created a document, called it a policy, communicated as a policy, and people followed that and somebody got harmed. It puts a huge significant liability on the organization for rogue policies like that.
Robbie, anything to add on the pitfalls of not following policies?
So I think that if you have an ad hoc approach to it, it shows a lack of consistency for people. And a really well-run organization is consistent. Where you have different people operating against different sets of rules, it's a recipe for chaos. And I always find that when people are bringing in digital transformation projects or there's mergers and acquisitions involved, it's one of the things that's often forgotten about in the rush for closure. But it is the thing that always really disturbs people because we as human beings require structure. So there are situations where the more authoritarian orientated the country, the more guidance that organizations need to give. And interestingly, with digital transformation projects, there's a big movement to outsource aspects of your processes and your businesses to possibly former Soviet Union countries, for example. In those countries, policies are absolutely important. People need to see that you have a clear method of operating. But I think it goes to the ethics and the way that the organization approaches how they deal with their own internal challenges and how they deal with the challenges that they're finding within their environment, their business environment.
So policies, very important. We get that. So it follows then, does it not, that organizations clearly must be managing them efficiently, ensuring they're accessible to their workforce. That goes without Oh, Michael, I get the feeling you're going to tell me that's not always the case, aren't you?
Certainly not. I mean, a lot of organizations don't even know what policies they have. They're all over the place. In my policy management by design workshop, there was one global financial services organization that went there and said, we don't even know what policies we have in our environment. They did a policy discovery process and found 1,500 policies in North America, and then doubled that when they discovered them across Europe and Asia. A healthcare firm that went to my policy management workshop in the California in San Francisco, they said, we actually found out we had 18,000 policies and procedures because we've acquired 20-some hospitals over the last 20 years, and they each came in with a completely redundant set of policies. Then a healthcare firm in New York, at my New York workshop said, we can beat that. We have 21,000 policies and procedures because of all the consolidation, and each one of these acquisitions comes with a complete redundant set of policies. And now we're trying to bring that down to 5,000. A lot of organizations don't even know what they have. Like a large retailer I'm working with, and I sort of alluded to this just a few minutes ago. They have this whole strategy in place right now that, if it's an official policy, it will be in this template, it'll be in this central policy system, it'll look like this, will be indexed and cataloged. Because if you find anything else out there, report it, because it's not an official policy. They're trying to get a hold on what policies they have. I was working with a large insurance firm a year ago, just as they went into COVID-19. And they went into COVID-19 in the work from home environment, and they found out they had 20 different policy portals in the environment. There's 20 different portals communicating policies in different templates, language styles, and formats. And the policies in the HR portal were changing with the change in responsibilities and health and safety and work environment and the home office environment. Accounting policies are changing, like home office expense policies. IT security policies are changing, dealing with the home office IT security. And the employees are like confused because they're all over the place. And there's old versions of policies in one portal that weren't on another portal. And it just was a complete mess. And I find that time and time again that organizations really don't even know what policies they had. In fact, I was keynoting at a conference a couple of years ago, and there's 200 people in the room. And I asked them, if the regulators, a stakeholder, external auditor, whoever it might be, came in and said, you want to see a master index of everything that's a policy in your organization, who could provide that? 2 people out of 200 raised their hand.
Wow. Robbie, I guess you must see similar things. You work with your customers on these kind of challenges.
Absolutely. And interestingly, just to back up what Michael was saying, last year when the COVID situation struck, we fast forwarded in terms of changing the way we work quite significantly with people working from home. And no one really saw that coming. I haven't met anybody who knew it was coming. And therefore, the way that we began to work, the requirements that our staff had completely changed. And it was necessity was the mother of invention at that point in time. It was just get it done, give people laptops, facilitate and it was a fast forward to a new point. I really believe that all the custom and practice that, if you were lucky, was written down in policy form somewhere, they all need to be rewritten. And indeed, they need to be rewritten with an eye to the future, because this current state is in a state of change also. You have a post-quarantine, post-vaccination situation where here's a new norm. You can drop in and out of work if you want, or we have a fully remote strategy going forward, or whatever it is. It's typical that the previous state a year ago wasn't reflected in anything that you documented. So the worst situation is that you reintroduce new policies, new ways of working, along with the old ways of working, and have complete chaos. And I think last year also a lot of people found that they didn't document sufficient. They hadn't got enough policies. I'm not actually putting forward a case for more policies. I just think that in the past we had a situation where we had scope creep, sort of a situation where if there was a policy, you didn't need a policy, so it's fine. We never looked at it until we had to. Whereas I think this provides a really good opportunity to draw a line and go, what does your business need? What are the real needs for you to legislate the type of organization that you need going forward? But you have to learn the lessons of the past, and you have to root out those rogue policies, those stores of outdated policies and guidance, and make sure that everybody knows that was then and this is now.
So learning those lessons from the past, Robbie, that's a really good point before we can look to the future with confidence. You mentioned COVID-19 really as a really inciting incident there, when everything changed, how we worked, where we worked, who we worked with. But it sounds as though this policy pandemic started a little bit, well, certainly a long time before that. So Michael, what are some of the reasons why we see this proliferation? I mean, I think you mentioned mergers and acquisitions. So it certainly can be one thing, but what else? Is it lack of internal ownership? Is it that governance teams are just under so much pressure because this regulatory landscape is changing so rapidly?
Well, part of it is a lack of a coordinated strategy. That there's different departments that have policies, like accounting policies, HR policies, quality policies, environmental policies, health and safety policies, legal corporate compliance policies, IT security policies. And so each of these departments goes in its own way without really strategizing, thinking, how can we provide a singular view into policies for our entire organization in a consistent framework, a consistent process, a consistent template, a consistent portal. Now, some organizations are starting to do that, and that's great, but a lot of organizations are sort of like the Wild West. They're all over the map. I mean, there's this, the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. It was built in the 1800s. It cost $5.5 million to build in the 1800s. That's one expensive house today. It took 38 years to build and had 147 different builders, but it had no design, no blueprint, or no architect. At the end of the day, it's got doors that open to walls or doors that open to 20-foot drops, staircases that go up or down to nowhere, skylights that are in floors instead of ceilings. It has 3,000 windows, I just described an organization's policy management program that over the last 38 years, 147 different builders of policy doing policy in their own way without really thinking logically, how can we make policies consistent in the organization?
That's a lot of windows. Yeah. Almost as many windows as Robbie has where he is today. So, I mean, I'm getting an idea of some of the challenges here, some of the big numbers that we're talking about, and particularly, like you say, through whether it is, mergers and acquisitions, whether it is not enough ownership, that there is a problem. So what is the future then? How do we start to tame this policy management problem? You talk about agile policy management and flexible, adaptable, something that is a little bit more flexible maybe than we have been in the past. Robbie, what's your take on the solution to this problem?
I think that a single source of truth for policies and also the associated training with policies, because a policy on its own has value, but it's immensely improved if you provide some sort of training alongside of that policy and give it context. And so really this single policy portal benefits the organization because it's somewhere that users can go to self-manage. Because again, a good example of a policy not doing its thing is where the author of the policy suddenly gets a call from an employee saying, could I get the latest version of the policy on whatever social media? And then a manager ringing and saying, could you send me the policy on social media that John signed? And you realize, well, that's a problem where really you need a policy portal. The two of them can go in. John can see what he signed. The manager can see what John signed, and they at least have from the outset a baseline upon which they can talk on what the rules are. And I see that time and time again where you either can't show that the policies were attested to, as in, they're just, I sent you an email at some stage and you should have seen it, or they're on a SharePoint system somewhere. And again, that gives rise to the proliferation where you have all these stores of various guidance. You bring them all together, you make it easy for people to access, you make it easy for people to consume. And at the same time, you provide guidance that engages users, that is proving that they can actually understand. Because so we took the policy, we took the training, and then what you might do is actually test them on whether they understood it or not, so that we can feel certain that these important guidance to our staff, these important policies are being followed. Because no one ever sat down and took the time to write a policy unless it was really important, unless there was typically a risk associated with it. So these things are serious. The problem is that they don't get the attention that they deserve. And when things go wrong, they typically go wrong really badly. And whilst in North America, you have that litigious situation. In Europe, you have sort of relatively similar type situations, whether it be in employment tribunals, be it in compliance, defenses with regulators. You have to be able to demonstrate that you took due care, wrote down what it is you hold, what standards you hold yourself to, and what standards you expect your workforce to hold themselves to. So one place, easy accessible, I think it's critical.
Single point of truth, single portal, if possible, good
Yes.
platform for the policies themselves. But Michael, what about the content of those policies? How do we make sure that they are able to effectively communicate the policies to their intended audience?
Certainly. Part of it is having what we call a policy on policies, or a meta policy. And with that, a style guide. And how do you write in the proper language and tone of the organization? How do you use the active voice and not the passive voice? How do you write concisely? One of the big things that comes up now is, the use of gender neutral terms and things in policies. And so you need guidance on how to write the policies. I was reviewing one policies, an organization supply chain code of conduct once, and it goes out to an international audience, like 20,000 facilities around the world. And most of these facilities, the reader has English as a second language. And I was surprised. I mean, this is a global Fortune 100 company at the time. And now they've addressed this and they publish in multiple languages, but at the time it was just published in English. But this supply chain code of conduct was written in the passive voice, long paragraphs with complex language, making it harder for an English reader, or actually somebody that has English as a second language, and making it harder for them to read, as well as just a native English reader. And what really struck me was just the carelessness in words. The first paragraph says company believes. The second paragraph says company strongly believes. So we have different levels of belief in the supply chain code of conduct. We might read right past that as native English speakers as just extra verbiage. But somebody that has English as a second language, which most of the people that this is going to, that's who they were, they're going to be reading every word and interpreting that. And they're going to say this second paragraph is more important than the first paragraph. And that's not the case. We need clear guidance in a structured process on writing policies. And as Robbie was actually talking about, the Agile approach to be able to access policies and training for employees in the portal, we also need Agile policy development and maintenance on the back end. Because if you think about it, business is changing. COVID-19 comes in and policies change, and business changes, processes change. You deal with an industry like financial services. There are 200 regulatory change events every business day from 1,000 regulators around the world in financial services. And so that's a lot. Now, some small fraction of those are going to impact policies. But if I'm changing 1 or 2 policies a day because of 200 regulatory change events, that's a lot. I was talking to one financial services firm in Europe this past year. They had a policy that took 6 months to get a revision to a policy that took 6 months to complete, went through 75 different reviewers. That's not agile. We need agile back-end policy authoring and development and maintenance, as well as agile front-end policy engagement to the employees.
So people who are experts at understanding the policies, defining those policies, in collaboration with people who are experts at ensuring that employees can engage, can understand, and ultimately act upon those policies.
So, for example, several years ago, I was doing a lot of interaction with Barbara at Starbucks. Barbara is retired now, but she was the policy manager at Starbucks. And it was her job at Starbucks to make sure every policy was consistent, and her and her team. And every policy went through them. Barbara told me that the only policy she ever wrote herself was the policy on writing policies. She wasn't responsible for writing all these policies, but she was responsible for coordinating the whole process and making sure that every policy that was written conformed to the Starbucks style guide and language and policy and writing policies.
Good work, Barbara. So I think that we're beginning to understand, obviously, what the benefits are of this agile policy management framework, process, portals, all of this stuff, making sure that the policies themselves are, of course, correct, but also able to communicate that their intent to their audience, the workforce. As we start to wrap up our conversation, we're certainly getting this sense that a policy management framework that is agile, that is flexible, that communicates its intent to its workforce is very important in terms of alignment on policies, but also in terms of adherence to those policies. Are there any other benefits, maybe, not direct benefits in terms of adherence and compliance that you see, Robbie, to having this strong policy management framework?
I mean, it's no accident that Michael mentioned Starbucks, because you typically find that some of the best organizations in the world who are executing against their business model, you'll find that a solid policy ecosystem is underneath that. And I remember working with one of the large oil companies, and again, when they were going to change an element of a big process, the first thing they said is, we'll give this to the lawyers last, almost as a fait accompli. So don't involve people with legal speak at the beginning. And they started out with, what are the big rules? What are the guidelines? And once they got to the point where they understood the objectives that they were trying to satisfy, it was the communication people of the company that came in. So the best policies communicate really well. They resonate with people quite quickly, and they're free of the sort of bibliography and references that you would see in something in a legal text. Once you have that, you get huge benefits in terms of people knowing what they're supposed to do, so huge time savings. And because you're executing against your business model, you tend to get less people moving away from that and inventing their own. That's the biggest problem associated with not having a proper approach to this issue, because anybody can fire up Microsoft Word, create a policy, and as Michael said, that puts the company on the hook for who knows what. Whereas if you have a solid approach to this in place, which is easily accessible, it actually acts as an oiling of the workings of the organization, because that's really what's underpinning it.
Michael, what's your take on maybe some of the non-obvious benefits of a strong policy management framework?
Well, it gets right to what even Robbie's alluding to too, is it's the culture and it's the integrity of the organization. I mean, policies have a direct impact on the culture and integrity of the organization. That's what it comes down to. But I must say, it's not just about the written policy, having the right policy, but having that policy followed, understood, and enforced in the environment is what impacts culture and integrity. You can have the right policy that nobody follows that can actually corrupt your culture. I've got a policy here on my laptop. Back in the year 2000, it was known to be the model policy. It was the model code of conduct. Other organizations were copying to be their code of conduct. I had a petroleum company from Canada that told me that they copied that code of conduct nearly word for word to be their code of conduct. I'm talking Enron's code of conduct. And with what started the whole Sarbanes-Oxley, and now we've got Wirecard in Germany almost like following the same suit. But having a great well-written policy isn't enough. That policy actually has to be lived, breathed, and enforced in the organization as well. That's absolutely critical. Policy management's absolutely critical, but it's not just about the proper writing of policies and how pretty they are and how you use white space. All those are very important things, but it's also about how you actually engage the employees and enforce the policies in the environment.
One of the things too, David, is that one of the reasons why I like it is that it stops debate. Far too often in organizations, when you don't have a clear stance on something or the tone hasn't been set, it allows for people to interpret. It allows for people to extrapolate on nothing. Whereas if you say, this is what we're going to do and these are the rules associated with it, and you link that back to your ethics and the overall culture of your organization, it makes for a much more agile environment. And so the most agile organizations last year were those organizations that went and rewrote the policies for working from home, rewrote the policies for the new ways of working in their organization. The fact of the matter is that was a minority, because most of us were scrambling to deal with the fallout of this thing. And the last thing on our minds was policies. But a year later, I don't think that excuse actually carries much water. And I think at this point in time, policies are more important than ever.
So before we go, let's do some takeouts, gentlemen. What do you suggest are good, practical, tangible next steps if, let's say, somebody watching or listening today recognizes this policy problem within their own organization and Michael would like to do something about it?
Here's my 5-step plan. The first step is plan your journey. That's going to start with understanding what's your current state. How many policy portals are there? You like that insurance company that has 20 different policy portals? How many different templates? How many departments issuing policies? What policies are out there? What's working? What's not working? It starts with understanding your current state and then planning what's my future state? Where do I want to be 2 years from now or 3 years from now? And so the very first step is to plan your journey. Where are we at now? Where do we want to be in 2 years or 3 years from now? The second step is to get the right people on board. Build that business case, engage other parts of the business, corporate compliance and ethics, IT security, human resources, legal, maybe quality and accounting. What are these departments that are issuing and managing policies? Start to get the right team on board. The third step is you need technology for this. We all use technology. If you're writing policies in stone tablets and chisels, that's a form of technology. If you're using pen and paper, that's a form of technology. If you're using word processing, that's definitely technology. If you're using meta compliance, we're starting to get some good technology. So in that context, we need to make sure that you have the right technology. You don't want to get like halfway on your journey and find out we don't have, like, say we're climbing a mountain. We only have enough equipment to get up halfway up the mountain. We've got to go back down and get some more equipment. Pick your technology infrastructure that's going to help you achieve that 2 or 3 year plan. And from there, break it up into stages, particularly if you might be doing this at a department level where it's not such a big issue. Maybe you're just trying to improve your accounting department policies, your IT security department policies. But if it's an enterprise policy management strategy, which I advocate, is that in that context, you need to break things up into a journey, into stages. If you climb Mount Everest too fast, what happens? You die. You got to get up to the first base camp and let your body acclimate to that altitude before you're ready to get to the next base camp. And you have to tackle it in stages. So if you're like that healthcare firm with 21,000 policies and you want to get down and procedures, not just policies, and you want to get down to 5,000, you're not going to accomplish that in 1 month or 3 months. You've got to break things down into stages that are manageable and achievable as well. So that was the fourth element. The fifth element is be ready for change. The journey's never over. Something like COVID-19 hits and it completely restructures how we communicate and engage the workforce on policies. We have a big merger and acquisition, and that brings a completely redundant sets of policies. New regulation, wherever it might be. We always have to adapt and be agile.
Always adapt, always be agile. Robbie, final thoughts and takeaways from you?
When it comes to policies, I think there's a quote from the film Galaxy Quest that is appropriate here. Never give up, never surrender, because policy management is not easy. It's, again, people's eyes glaze over. And typically it takes a load of effort and a load of time to actually make it happen. In terms of what people should do, I think they should sign up for Michael's newsletters. They're very entertaining, and I find that they help with the journey that people are on. And if at the end of this, we'll leave a link to the OSEG guide to implementing a integrated policy management program, which is on our website for people to download. And there's some excellent resources there for people to get started, for people to move along with this journey.
And in that context, Robbie, we just, my OSEG and myself just actually developed PolicyManagementPros.com with a certification in this space and helping people, define what are the elements of a policy on writing policies and these different elements. And so we've just released that website now.
Michael, Robbie, thank you both so much for joining us today. Lots and lots to take away from that. Thank you.
Until the next time.
And thank you for joining us too. Until next time, bye-bye.